He didn't snarl, didn't bark, didn't even twitch when the mortar exploded less than 100 yards away. The ground shook, dust lifted in choking waves, and fragments of stone clattered down like hail. Yet the animal simply lay there in the dirt. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, his flanks soaked dark with blood, his breathing shallow but steady. Dozens of Marines thundered past him, boots pounding the earth, eyes focused forward. To them, he was just another stray wandering too close to the chaos. Some assumed he was a mascot left behind by a previous unit. Others barely noticed him at all. He wasn't worth a stretcher, wasn't worth a morphine. But then Petty Officer Elias Grant, a Navy corpsman attached to the company, slowed his pace. Something about the stillness caught his attention. This wasn't the frozen posture of fear or shock. It was the kind of discipline that came only from conditioning. Elias dropped to one knee beside the wounded shepherd, brushing dust from the animal's coat with a blood-stained glove. The dog's eyes half open, steady and unafraid. Elias leaned closer, feeling for vitals, running his hand over the torn harness that clung to the dog's ribs. It was blood-soaked, but the stitching was military-grade, reinforced at stress points. Not the kind of thing a village stray would wear. And then Elias asked the one question none of the others had thought to voice. Has this dog been trained for combat? That single realization changed everything, because the animal they had all ignored wasn't simply clinging to life, he was waiting. 2 hours later, more than 30 men would owe their lives to the decision Elias Grant made in that moment, kneeling beside a bleeding shepherd most had dismissed. The dust clung to everything, suspended in the air like a curtain that refused to fall. After each engagement, it was the same, to find, to settle, too heavy to breathe without tasting grit. On the tongue, every step Elias took raised another pale cloud, coating his fatigues, his boots, and the streaks of dried blood on his gloves that he had long stopped noticing. The medevac helicopters had already departed with the most critical casualties, their rotor wash leaving a hollow silence in their wake. Now the remains of a half-collapsed schoolhouse served as the casualty collection point. Red engineers tape-marked the safe zones, fluttering from broken rebar like grim banners. Empty for bags dangled from fence posts, swaying in the hot wind. As though mocking the fragility of life, Elias moved from Marine to Marine with a medic's rhythm, his hands acting almost without thought. Check vitals, tighten a tourniquet, tag another casualty for evacuation. His face revealed nothing, not detachment, but the discipline of someone who had done this far too many times in far too many places. You're stable, he murmured, to a young private whose shoulder was embedded with shrapnel. Just keep pressure on the gauze. You'll be fine. He turned to step toward the next wounded man when his boot nudged something soft, not a body, not gear, something larger, warmer. He froze and glanced down. A German shepherd lay sprawled in the dust. The dog's coat was coated in the same chalky debris that blanketed everything else, one forepaw bent at a grotesque angle, his flank bandaged with a strip of fabric that had long since soaked through. The work of someone who knew field dressing but hadn't stayed to finish the job. For a split second, Elias thought the animal was dead, but then the shepherd blinked slow, deliberate, studying him with unnerving clarity. What the hell? Elias muttered under his breath. Stray, a corporal shouted over his shoulder. Been hanging around since Bravo Company pushed through this morning. Stubborn, mutt won't leave. Another Marine gave a dry laugh, empty of humor. Probably some mascot from the last unit. Looks half dead anyway. Elias didn't respond. He crouched, scanning the dog with a practiced eye. No panicked whimpering, no flailing attempts to escape or bite. The shepherd simply lay there, breathing in measured rhythm, watching with eyes that seemed far too old for an animal. There was something else too, something in the way the dog tracked his movements, not with the desperate hunger of a stray, but with the quiet assessment of someone evaluating a comrade. Elias recognized the look because he had worn it himself after too many tours in too many war zones. This was no ordinary animal. The harness told him more. Beneath the grime and torn straps, it was built for endurance, woven to integrate with modular gear, reinforced by professional stitching. The shepherd held himself with dignity even as blood pooled in the dirt beneath him. Not a mascot. Elias murmured. He reached into his medkit and pulled out a green tag labeled non-human casualty. Clipping it to the shredded harness, he began laying out supplies. You're patching up a dog? One Marine asked incredulously. I'm treating a casualty, Elias replied calmly, already inserting it for line. Unless you've got someone more cooperative, you can wait. The needle slid beneath the skin without resistance. The dog didn't flinch, didn't growl, even as Elias examined the broken paw. The shepherd's breathing remained measured. "You've been through this before, haven't you?" Elias whispered. A passing Marine slowed to watch. "Why waste supplies, Doc? He's not going to make it anyway." Elias ignored him, carefully splinting the fracture. His hands moved with practiced precision, but his voice softened, steady, and calm as if speaking to a fellow soldier. "Easy there. We'll get you stabilized. No sudden moves. You'll be on the next bird out." The shepherd's ears twitched faintly at the sound, but his body remained motionless, perfectly cooperative. When Elias parted the fur behind one ear, he found confirmation, a surgical scar, clean, deliberate, the kind left by an implanted tracking chip. This dog had a history, a record, a purpose. Elias traced the scar with his gloved fingers, then moved methodically down the dog's frame. Every mark told a story. Scar tissue along the ribs spoke of old shrapnel wounds, once treated with precision. A nick in the left ear suggested flying glass or metal fragments. The pads of his paws were hardened, braided with scars that only months of running over hostile terrain could leave. This was not the record of a base mascot or a frightened stray. This was the medical history of a seasoned operator. The shepherd blinked at him, steady, patient, as though silently confirming what Elias was beginning to understand. "You're not just any dog," Elias whispered. He reached for a pen light and pried open the shepherd's mouth. The teeth told him everything, not just capped canines, but wear patterns etched by years of bite training, controlled force, perfect targeting. The animal even lifted his lips slightly, cooperating with the examination. Complete trust, professional compliance. Elias had treated mascots before, strays that latched onto forward bases, scavenging scraps and offering companionship. They were unpredictable under fire, skittish, nervous, untrained. This dog was different. He was deliberate. "You've done this 1,000 times, haven't you?" Elias murmured. A lance corporal leaned nearby, smirking. "What's the medical opinion, Doc? You going to put him in for a medal?" Elias clipped the saline line to the fourth bag, taping it gently to the dog's uninjured foreleg. "I'm giving him fluids because he let me handle his wounds without protest. When I shifted his flank, he moved to give me better access. That's not instinct, that's training." The Marines quieted. Skepticism gave way to curiosity. Elias turned the harness over, brushing away dirt. There, stitched into the interior padding with wax thread, was a faint serial number, faded, nearly lost to time, but still legible. MWD-79 for military working dog. The word seemed to hang in the air. Elias looked up slowly. "Whose dog is this?" Shrugs, blank expressions. One young Marine finally spoke. "We've seen him around for months. Doesn't beg for food, doesn't get underfoot, just follows us, sleeps light, sometimes runs ahead on patrols, circles back if nothing's there. Thought he was just messed up from being out here too long." Elias studied the shepherd again. The eyes tracked every movement, every voice, with an alertness that never switched off. "Not messed up," he said softly. "Operational." No one argued. The day dragged on. Gunfire crackled in the distance, but it barely registered any more sporadic and unfocused. The real sounds were closer, the hum of generators, the buzz of drones overhead, the murmured voices of Marines going through motions they knew too well. Elias was tightening a pressure dressing when the tone behind him shifted. Not the gunfire, but the urgency in voices, the slap of boots against hard ground, then the metallic ping of a grenade spoon hitting concrete. Elias's body moved before his mind caught up. He threw himself over the Marine he was treating, pressing his weight down as a shield around him. Men ducked for cover. And then Elias saw something that froze him. The dog, the one with the shattered leg and the IV line, had pushed himself upright. Not in panic, not at random, purposefully, on 3 legs, staggering. He oriented toward the grenade, his eyes locked on it, analyzing, calculating. The shepherd gauged the bounce, the roll, the final resting point. And then, instead of seeking shelter, he moved directly toward the largest concentration of wounded men. With a surge of strength, the dog pressed his good shoulder into the grenade. Just as it completed its final roll, the motion wasn't graceful, but it was precise. The explosive skittered behind a nearby concrete barrier. The shepherd twisted his body, positioning himself between the blast and the triad's line, angling to absorb shrapnel. No fear, no hesitation, just execution of learned protocol. The explosion, tore through the barrier a heartbeat later, muffled but violent. The shockwave rolled across the courtyard. Concrete fragments sprayed harmlessly into rubble. The Triad's line was untouched. When the ringing in his ears began to fade, Elias scrambled toward the shepherd. The dog was on his side again, chest heaving, dust clinging to his fur. A fresh scrape bled along his flank, but his eyes were still sharp, still alive. "You insane bastard," Elias muttered, running his hands over the animal, checking for new injuries. "You moved on a broken leg." The shepherd lifted his head just enough to press his muzzle against Elias's wrist, not seeking comfort, not asking for praise, simply acknowledging. Around them, silence blanketed the courtyard. Marines stared, wide-eyed, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. "He didn't run," a corporal whispered. "He pushed it away," another said hoarsely. Elias met their gazes. Gone were the jokes about mascots and strays. Every face showed the same recognition. This was no pet. "Who trained him?" Elias asked quietly. No one had an answer. But everyone understood one thing now. The shepherd was no stray. He was a soldier. The courtyard slowly returned to motion, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Marines who had once stepped over the shepherd without a thought were now glancing his way with respect, even awe. Elias crouched beside him, rewrapping the bloody bandages with care. His hands moved automatically, but his mind was racing. He had seen bomb disposal specialists risk everything to protect their unit. He had never seen a dog wounded, half dead, execute a maneuver that deliberate. The harness caught his attention. Again, he examined the straps more carefully, running his fingers along the seams until something stiff resisted. Tucked inside a hidden flap, he found it, a laminated ID strip, faded by years of dust and sweat. MWD-79 for handler, Sergeant Adrian Kwan, 75th Ranger Regiment, K9 Detachment Bravo. Status, retired, unfit for redeployment. Handler Kier, Kandahar. 2020. Elias stared at the words, his throat tightening. Retired, unfit, handler killed in action. And yet here the dog was 3 years later, still patrolling, still fighting, still saving lives. He whispered the name, Adrian Kwan. "I remember. That one." The shepherd's ears flicked at the sound, his gaze never leaving Elias. "You've been without your handler a long time, haven't you?" Elias murmured. No one spoke for a while. Then a lance corporal, grease-stained hands, sleeves rolled up despite the heat, shifted closer. "We've seen him on patrol for months. Wouldn't let anyone near at first. Just followed us, like a shadow. We thought about reporting it, but no one wanted the paperwork. Command doesn't deal with strays. Too many liability issues." Another Marine added, "Never begged for food. Waited until we walked away, then took what was left. Wouldn't step inside buildings, slept outside the wire." A staff sergeant with salt in his voice joined the circle. "I was here the morning he showed up 8 months back. Walked right onto the perimeter like he belonged. Calm, silent, like he was checking in." Elias listened, the pieces clicking together. "What about when you relocated?" he asked. The Marines exchanged looks. Finally, the staff sergeant answered. "He followed, every time. Across provinces, we tried leaving him. Didn't matter. He always found us. Command even sent animal control twice. Both times he vanished for a week, then reappeared as soon as they left. Smart," Elias said under his breath. "Smarter than we gave him credit for." The truth crystallized. This dog hadn't been haunting them like some ghost of war. He had been running his own operation, solo patrols, perimeter sweeps, advanced recon. Never in the way, never drawing attention, just working. "You weren't following the people," Elias whispered to the shepherd. "You were following the mission." The Marines around him nodded. "That's what we figured." The corporal said, "He doesn't need orders. He's been waiting for them." Elias looked down at the shepherd again. The dog's breathing had steadied. His eyes remained sharp, listening, ready, not really resting, just conserving energy. "You've been freelancing for 3 years, haven't you?" Elias said softly. The dog shifted his muzzle against Elias's hand. The gesture was subtle but undeniable. That evening, Elias found himself pulled into the edge of an operations briefing. A map was spread across the hood of a battered Humvee. Markers scattered like chess pieces. The operations sergeant pointed. With a pen, his tone grim. "Convoy rolls in 30. Route Charlie's our only exit. Intel says it's seated. Likely pressure plates, daisy chained. Engineers are pinned at the east checkpoint. Won't make it here in time. Elias studied. The map. Route Charlie was a narrow ribbon of asphalt winding between jagged terrain. Drainage ditches lined both sides, choke points scattered throughout. It was textbook IED territory, the kind of stretch that had swallowed convoys whole. A lieutenant swore under his breath. Command wants the wounded out before dark. Air. Evacs grounded, weather system rolling in. No alternate routes. We're trapped unless we move through. The options were grim. Wait and risk another attack, or gamble lives on an uncleared road. Elias cleared his throat. There's a third option. Heads turned. It wasn't often a corpsman spoke during tactical discussions. His job was to patch holes, not weigh in on maneuvers. The shepherd can clear it, Elias said evenly. Silence followed, broken by a nervous laugh. The injured dog, the same one who just neutralized a live grenade on 3 legs, Elias replied. A lieutenant. Stepped forward, skeptical. Doc, he's listed as retired, unfit for redeployment. Elias met his gaze with respect. Sir, he wasn't retired. He was abandoned. There's a difference. The staff sergeant from earlier backed him up. Corman's right. That dog's been running ops on his own, recon, patrols. Never once led us wrong. An engineer sergeant crossed his arms. Even if he's trained, that leg's compromised. How does he sweep a road? I'll rig a support harness, Elias said without hesitation. He doesn't need to run, just smell. We don't need perfection, we need detection, and he's been doing it for years. The operations sergeant hesitated, studying Elias. Then the dog. You're sure? I'm sure he wants to, Elias said. He nodded toward the edge of the circle. The shepherd had positioned himself just outside the group, sitting tall, ears pricked, eyes sharp, not close enough to interfere, but near enough to listen. His posture was unmistakable. He was waiting for assignment. The lieutenant rubbed his temples, looking from Elias to the dog. Say he does find something, how does he tell us? He's not hooked into our comms. You're thinking like he's a pet, Elias answered. If he detects explosives, he'll go into full alert posture. Sit perfectly still, facing the target, not moving a muscle. That's basic detection protocol, and if he's wrong, then we're no worse off than we are now. The operations sergeant frowned, and if he's right, then we just avoided another body bag, Elias said. Sir, in 3 years of shadowing you out here, has anyone ever seen him make a mistake? Silence. No one could recall a single time the shepherd had blundered. The sergeant finally gave a sharp nod. Fine. Corpsman, you run point with him. No heroics. If he alerts, we stop. Engineers confirm. You own this. Elias turned immediately. Already digging through his pack, he fashioned a makeshift support harness from a modified litter strap, looping it carefully over the shepherd's chest and connecting it to his own belt. The rig would take pressure off the shattered foreleg while still allowing the animal to move forward. The shepherd adjusted to the harness instinctively. His body leaned forward into the pull, his weight balanced. Elias rested a hand on the thick fur behind his neck, ready to get back to work. Partner. The dog didn't wag his tail. He didn't whine. He simply stood taller, eyes locked forward. Complete in his purpose, they stepped off as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across Route Charlie. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, warping the horizon into restless mirages. Elias led with the shepherd floating beside him on the support harness. Behind them, a staggered column of 10 Marines advanced cautiously, weapons up, every eye fixed on the dog. The patrol moved slow, deliberate, no rushing, each step measured. The shepherd worked methodically, nose hovering just above the ground. He ignored the obvious debris, spent brass, shredded cables, scraps of clothing. His ears flicked independently, triangulating sounds. Elias couldn't hear. At the first checkpoint, the shepherd paused at a pile of rubble near the ditch. He tested the air, lingered, then dismissed it with a low exhale. Safe. 20 meters farther, a tangle of discarded uniforms caught his attention. Again, he halted, weight shifting forward, nose working the breeze. After a long moment, he turned away, harmless. The Marine's nerves wound tighter with each pause, every false alarm stretching the silence. Then they reached the curve. The road narrowed into a bottleneck, hemmed by rock walls and a drainage culvert. Perfect ambush territory, perfect for pressure plates. The shepherd's pace changed. His steps shortened, each movement deliberate, as though he were measuring distance itself. Elias felt the shift through the harness before he saw it. The dog was pulling slightly ahead. Focused, intent, they reached the culvert. The shepherd's breathing pattern shifted. He slowed more, then stopped. Not suddenly, gradually. Movement fading into absolute stillness. His nose pointed at the ground, his spine straight, ears rigid. Then, with mechanical precision, he lowered himself into a textbook sit motionless. Elias raised his radio, voice steady. Red light. We've got an alert. The Marines immediately dropped to defensive positions, weapons trained outward. But Elias kept his eyes locked on the shepherd. The dog didn't flinch, didn't waver. His entire body was a signal. Confirmation. Elias said into the mic. Probable IED. Covert area. Marking position. 2 engineers crawled forward on their bellies, circling wide. The dog didn't blink. His gaze never left the ground. In front of him, minutes ticked like hours. Finally, one engineer raised a gloved fist. Contact. Pressure plate wired to secondary charges. They worked carefully, exposing the device. What emerged was deadly. A pressure plate wired to twin secondary charges, positioned to collapse a section of road and trap vehicles in the kill zone. Elias's stomach tightened. If they had rolled a convoy through blind, it didn't bear thinking about. The corporal who had once mocked the idea of treating the dog crouched nearby, watching the engineers work. His voice was hushed. That's it. It was perfect. Like he'd done it his whole life. Elias glanced at the shepherd, who had finally relaxed out of alert posture, chest rising and falling evenly. He has, Elias said. We just reminded him what he was trained for. 30 minutes later, the convoy rolled safely through the cleared stretch, drivers giving nods and waves as they passed. Some tapped their helmets in salute. Others simply slowed, their expressions unreadable, but full of respect. Elias stood at the roadside with the shepherd beside him, the harness still secured. The dog didn't look at the vehicles. He stared down the road ahead, still alert, as though the mission wasn't finished. You've earned your rest, Elias whispered. But even as he said it, he realized the shepherd wasn't waiting to rest. He was waiting to be acknowledged. Not for one mission, not for this moment. For 3 long years of silent service no one had recorded. The last convoy rumbled down Route Charlie, engines fading into the distance. Dust hung in the air long after the vehicles disappeared, glowing orange in the dying sunlight. The shepherd stood beside Elias, his body tense with fatigue, but his posture unbroken. The harness supported his weight, yet the dog refused to sag into it. He stood tall until the final vehicle was gone. Only then did his chest rise in a deep, weary sigh. One more ride, Elias murmured, resting a hand on his thick fur. Then, you're done. But even as the words left his lips, Elias knew the truth. The dog wasn't waiting to be done. He was waiting to be acknowledged. For 3 years he had worked in the shadows, no handler, no records, no recognition, and still, he had never quit. The medevac bird came at dusk. Marines loaded the last of the casualties. Strapping stretchers into place, Elias guided the shepherd up the ramp, securing him on a folded tarp. The dog settled instantly, his body finally yielding to exhaustion. His eyes closed, not in the half-alert doze Elias had seen before, but in genuine, unguarded sleep. For the first time since they met, the shepherd looked at peace. The flight was turbulent, engines roaring as the bird climbed. Elias kept one hand on the dog's flank the entire way, feeling the steady rhythm of breath against his palm. Each rise and fall reassured him the animal had earned far more than another night of survival. When they landed at the field hospital, bureaucracy awaited. A harried admin officer intercepted them, clipboard in hand, her expression detached. Priority medical goes to human casualties, she said briskly. Non-military animals are to be held until space becomes available. Elias didn't move. His voice stayed calm, but his jaw tightened. He's not a non-military animal. He's a combat veteran. She glanced at the torn harness. The laminated strip still clung to the interior, half hidden by grime. Status shows retired. Unfit for service. That means he isn't authorized for treatment. Elias flipped the harness, holding up the ID strip. This is MWD 794. Formerly attached to Sergeant Adrian Kwan, Ranger Regiment. His handler was killed in action 3 years ago. Today, this dog saved a triage line from a grenade and detected an IED that would have buried half a convoy. The officer's expression didn't waver. Regulations are clear. Corpsman, retired status means his service ended. Without active duty designation, he has no entitlement. Elias's chest burned with anger. He understood now why the shepherd had wandered for 3 years, written off, forgotten, trapped in a limbo where the system had no place for him, too specialized to adopt, too costly to maintain, too valuable to euthanize publicly. And yet he had kept working, alone. So what happens to him now? Elias asked quietly. The officer's shrug was clinical. Local animal control, if capacity allows. Otherwise. She didn't finish. Elias looked down at the shepherd, who lay calmly at his feet, listening as though he understood every word. 3 years of service. 3 years of silent loyalty. 3 years of saving lives when no one asked him to. And now discarded again, not because he failed, but because his paperwork had failed him. Not while I'm breathing, Elias said under his breath. Before the officer could reply, another voice cut in. Corman Grant. Elias turned. A senior chief approached, broad-shouldered, weathered face. The kind of bearing that came from decades of hard deployments. A sealed trident gleamed on his chest. I read your field report, the chief said, reviewed engineer logs, saw the helmet cam footage, pretty clear what happened. Out there. He crouched, eyes meeting the shepherd's steady gaze. Then he looked back at the officer, MWD 794, attached to Ranger Detachment Bravo. Handler killed in action. Status updated. Operational service restored. Honors reinstated. The admin. Officer stiffened, but the chief's tone left no room for debate. She scribbled on her clipboard, lips pressed thin. Elias knelt beside the dog, voice low. You hear that? You're back on the books. The shepherd's tail moved once against the tarp, a single thump, nothing more. But it was enough. Later, after the paperwork was finalized and the shepherd transferred to a proper medical bay, Elias sat outside the tent in a folding chair. The compound glowed under the last light of day. Inside, the shepherd slept peacefully. Not the half-sleep of vigilance, ears twitching at every sound. Real, deep rest. The kind only possible when a burden has finally been lifted. For the first time in 3 years. The dog was no longer forgotten. Elias leaned back, staring at the horizon. He didn't know what the future held, whether the dog would be retired, stateside, reassigned, or finally given the honorable discharge he had earned long ago. But one thing was certain, this animal would never again be dismissed as just another stray. Not while Elias lived to tell his story. The night settled over the compound, thick and heavy, broken only by the low hum of generators and the occasional rattle of distant gunfire. Elias sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the dim glow of the medical tent. Inside, the shepherd slept soundly, his chest rising in steady rhythm, free at last from the constant edge of vigilance. The Marines who passed by slowed when they neared the tent. No one laughed anymore. No one called him a mutt or a stray. They gave quiet nods, some tipping their helmets, others simply glancing in silence. Respect had replaced dismissal. Elias thought back to the first time he saw the dog lying in the dirt, half dead, overlooked by everyone else. He remembered the stillness, not the stillness of fear, but of training, of discipline, of a soldier waiting for orders that never came. How many missions had he shadowed, invisible yet essential? How many nights had he kept patrols safe, sleeping, outside the wire, watching silently? How many lives had been spared because a forgotten dog refused to stop working when the world stopped watching? The truth gnawed at Elias. If he hadn't noticed, the shepherd might have faded into obscurity, his service erased by bureaucracy, his loyalty unrecognized. The dog had done everything right, yet the system had failed him. Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low as though speaking directly to the animal within the tent. You weren't following people. You were following the mission. You stayed operational when everyone else gave up on you. And now, you've finally been seen. The shepherd stirred slightly, as if acknowledging the words even in sleep. And then came the question, the one Elias couldn't shake, the one he knew others would ask when they heard this story. Should a combat dog service record end with their handler's death, or should their honor live on, earned through loyalty and sacrifice that no paperwork could ever erase? The thought echoed in Elias's mind, heavier than any pack he had carried in the field. Because loyalty doesn't always come in uniform. Sometimes it comes with 4 legs, steady eyes, and a heartbeat that never falters. Sometimes the greatest heroes don't ask for recognition, they simply keep working, until someone finally notices. If you had seen the shepherd lying in the dust, broken and ignored, what would you have thought? Just another casualty of war, or something more, someone still waiting for orders, still carrying a mission. still protecting lives even when forgotten by the system that made him. That night, as Elias finally let his own eyes close, one truth anchored itself in his chest. The dog was no stray. He was a soldier, and his story would not be lost again.